Hi, it's Jan Beta, and I'm back here with the Commodore Max that I got for a couple of days or weeks even. I played Omega Race on this, but it's the only cartridge I got, and since this doesn't have any ROM, and it's pretty difficult to get cartridges for this, I decided to make my own kind of multi-cartridge for this one, so I can play some games and try out stuff. There is a professional product that is available for download. I don't think it's available as a whole at the moment. I'm going to link that in below. That is the Multimax Cartridge, which is basically a 1 megabyte EEPROM that holds everything that ever was released for this machine. And it has a convenient little menu that you can choose the titles from, and it's a lot better than what I am going to build. You can download the PCB layout and the schematics and everything for the Multimax cartridge, and had I thought of it earlier, I would have been able to build one. Might do it at a later point and order some of the PCBs, but I just don't have the time to do it because I want to send this back to its owner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of these Versa 64 cards that BWAC designed. I'm going to link this stuff in below. You can also check out BWAC's channel, which is concerned with very high level retro hacks most of the time. Really, really interesting, and there's a lot to learn from this guy. And he's a very nice guy. So he designed this, and what it is a very versatile Commodore 64 cartridge, which also supports the Ultimax mode, which is a compatibility, yeah, I think that's the word, compatibility mode with the Commodore Max. So you can basically put this into the Ultimax mode and put an EEPROM in here. And there's room for a little dip switch that you can then choose different ROMs on the ROM you put in here. That's what I'm gonna try. So this is going to involve some EEPROM burning. So I'm using my trusty TL866CS, which I modded to be a TL866A, which is basically just adding a pin header here and hacking the firmware, which works pretty nicely. I think Mindflare Retro made a pretty nice video about that. I'm going to link that in here. So I don't even know if this is still available. I think there's a newer model of these. I highly recommend these. They are pretty inexpensive and very, very useful for these retro stuff, retro EEPROM stuff. There's basically adapters for all kinds of EEPROMs, and you can use a lot of different EEPROMs from factory here. So, Mini Pro programmer. Highly recommended. Not sponsored or anything, this is just highly recommended. So some of you might know that I use a Hackintosh for my day-to-day work, and as this thing is not supported by any Apple hardware, I'm using a version of Windows XP in VirtualBox on the Hackintosh, which is kind of weird, but it works just fine. So I'm using this to run the EEPROM programmer. So I made a little folder of Max cartridges. There's a list of Max cartridges I'm going to link in below. There's like 24 cartridges available for the system because it wasn't on the market for long. So it just shows some of my favorites, like Avengers, Jupiter Lander. There's the Mini Basic, there's Radar Red Race, Clowns, Le Mans, Omega Race, Wizard of War. So that's 8 ROMs that I can fit on the cartridge because I'm using a 64K EEPROM, which is the maximum you can use on the Versa 64 card. But I think 8 games is plenty, given that the 24 ROMs that are available, there's many of them are just different versions of the same game. So what I'm going to do is to make one file out of these with this thing, and I'm just going to do it the way. If you want to see this in detail, the process, you can watch my Atari multi-cartridge video that I made a while back. You basically can use the copy command in Windows to make one file out of multiple files. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to put this in alphabetical order. You make a little plus and just add all the files one after another. And this should result in a 64K what am I going to call it? Max card bin, which is the exact thing we are going to program into the EEPROM. So there we are. Okay, let's program the EEPROM. Wow, I have a lot of EEPROM stuff here. Max card, there it is. Okay, this should be binary. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. I have to put in the right EEPROM type, of course. This is the WinBond 27C512, which is WinBond DIP28. Yeah, that's the one. 512. Okay. So now we have to load it again. Next card. This should all be full of data now, which it is. And then we can program. Now it's programming the EEPROM. And we're done. So what I'm going to do now is to prepare the Versa 64 card. I'm going to put in some dip switches, which I have here. So some dip switches. And I'm also going to put in a socket for the EEPROM and some resistors, which are 22K resistors. There are 4 22K resistors. And I'm going to solder this all up. Yeah, and that's going to be it. And then we will test it in a Max machine. Are you as excited as I am? I'm pretty excited because I don't know if this works at all in the end. We're going to find out pretty soon, I guess. So what I also need to add is a capacitor, which is a 100 nanofarad capacitor, I think. That's for smoothing the supply voltage for the EEPROM. 100 nanofarads. So now I'm at the point where I have to look up which the jumpers are that I have to close in order for this to operate as a Max cartridge. So I have the PDF here, and I really need to put this into jumper 4, jumper 6 and jumper 3 mode. So this is an 8K Ultimax, and all the games I put on there are 8 kilobyte games. There's a combination of 16K and 8K games would be possible with this cartridge, but it's much easier if you only use 8K games. So that's what I did. There's this bank of jumpers there, solder jumpers, that I just have to put little solder bridges in. And I need to go with 4, 6 and Let me see. 3. So I made some nice solder bridges, 4, 6, and 3. That should put this cartridge hardwired to the Ultimax mode, which I hope will work on the Max machine. I'm going to put in the EEPROM, and we're going to see if it works at all. So the first thing I'm going to do is to test this with the Commodore 64, I guess. Okay, I have the Commodore 64 hooked up here, and I'm going to test if there's anything working with this cartridge. Let's see. So there we are, that's Wizard of War. Okay, so by the way, the Commodore 64 is fully compatible with the cartridges for the Max machines, so this is perfect for testing this, I guess. So there's Wizard of War. So the first 3 dip switches should be for setting the actual 8K that this is referring to on the EEPROM to the bank that this actually is loading into the memory. So I am taking notes here. So this is the first 3 dip switches, and these are all down. So it's Wizard of War. So let's try with another switching. Let's take the first one. You should never switch the switches while the computer is turned on. So I'm just going to try now what the different positions bring me. Okay, so this is like nothing. Oh, this is like the Max Basic. Okay. So I think some of them don't work. Maybe it's the last dip switches that change stuff. Okay, so there's radar red rays. I think, yeah, bonus red, that's radar red rays. So okay, so it's the last dip switches that changed it. So let's see. Okay, so this is Jupiter Lander. So I think I make the file I used for the EEPROM available as a download in the description, so you can use it too. It seems to work. Let's try on the Max. So here's the 8 possible positions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So yeah, there we go. That's the combinations that are possible. Okay, let's see how this multi-cartridge fares on the actual Max. Let's see. There's Limo. Okay. Let's try Jupiter Lander. Okay. Let's try Radar Red Race. Okay. Wizard of War. That's Wizard of War. Avengers. Okay, this doesn't work too well either. Don't know why. Omega Race should work. Had that. That's Omega Race. But there's indeed something wrong. So clowns maybe? Clowns. So for some reason, I don't really know, this card that I just made doesn't really work. It works partially, just as you've seen, but I can't really get into any game. Whereas the cartridge that was coming with this works pretty much flawlessly. I can just play Omega Race. And I think it might be it might have something to do with the settings, the jumper settings or something, but I don't really know what it could be. Might be there's some other difference between the Commodore 64 cards and the Versa 64 card that I didn't think of. So I think I'm just gonna keep it at that for the moment. Because I can't really keep the machine for much longer. I have to send it back to its owner. Yeah, I'm pretty much out of ideas with the cartridge there. The machine seems to work fine. The other cartridge that came with it, the original cartridge, seems to work absolutely fine. So there's no point. Keyboard works. There's no point really in doing anything else. I suppose this just doesn't work for some reason. Everything else seems to be fine. I don't know why these games start up and then they appear to not start at all. So I learned from the all-knowing internet that it might be an issue with the EEPROM being too slow. I have these faster ones, which are 150 nanoseconds, but they are exactly the same. So maybe it's a combination of contact issues. The cartridge slot on the Max is a bit deeper, I think, than the Commodore 64. So this was made for the Commodore 64. So it doesn't fit quite rightly. So yeah, I really don't know. The timing might be an issue. Maybe I need even faster ones than this one. But yeah, I'm really sorry this didn't work. It seemed like a good idea, but it doesn't seem to work. Even though it seems to be all the right settings, and it works on the Commodore 64 flawlessly. So no idea really. Hope this is informative. If you have any ideas why this doesn't work, post them in the comments below. Yeah. So it's actually a couple of weeks later, and as you can see, I have my the lab looks different. I have my new ESD mat here, and I still couldn't figure out why the cartridge I built didn't work properly, and I had to give the Max back, as I said. So I ordered the Multimax Cartridge PCBs I was talking about shortly after shooting the video, really, and they have arrived like a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, I think I'm just going to build one. This has like a menu after reset that you can choose the 24 cartridges or so that this has on it. 1 megabyte EEPROM. There's a little RAM on it, like 2 kilobytes for the basic. So the Max Basic works. There's a couple of 74 logic chips, and it's going to have a handy reset button. So yeah, let me just solder this up, program the EEPROM with the Multimax software, which is available for free. Also, these Gerber files that you need to make these PCBs are available for free. I'm going to link the Multimax site below. Yeah, without further ado, let's just build this. And unfortunately, I don't have the Max here anymore, of course, so I'm just going to be able to test this on the Commodore 64, but it's still pretty useful to have this on the Commodore 64, I think. So, and of course, I'm using sockets for all the ICs, just in case something doesn't quite work as intended. So for the little capacitors, I'm just using 100 nanofarad ones. There's, I think, 2 of them. Ta-da! Okay, now for populating the PCB. 74 LS08 is this one. 74 LS273. This is all pretty old school parts, but it is intended by the makers of this cartridge to make it easy for hobbyists to make one themselves. So they used all through-hole stuff and old school components. And these are all pretty easy to get, even though 74 logic is kind of like passé. 74 LS27. And I usually use the table to bend the legs a bit inwards before I put them in a socket, because then they fit better. Okay, that should be in. Then we have our RAM, which is a 6116. It's also used in the VIC-20, as it says on my little stash here. So now the only thing left to do is to program the EEPROM and add a switch, or like a button. So I'm just programming the EEPROM as I did with the EEPROM before, except for this is a 1 megabyte one, M27C801 from ST. It takes a while because it's a 1 megabyte chip. Whoa. Yeah, this is like really slow. I'm just gonna edit this part out and I'll be right back with testing it on a Commodore 64. Okay, I have my test Commodore 64 set up. The cartridge is inserted into the cartridge slot. Power is connected, the monitor is connected, I connected the speakers. Let's try and turn it on. Okay, there's quite some cheesy music, so let's see. Let's start something. Ah, and I can switch through, okay, that's nice. There we are. This seems to work. Yeah. So this seems to work fine. I'm just going to add the reset switch and the case. I hope I have a case left. So unfortunately the only case I have left that fits other Commodore 64 cartridges doesn't fit quite. Yeah, it doesn't. I can't really make it fit. I cut a bit off and it still doesn't fit. So I'll have to order a case that might fit. This is a pretty cheap one I found on eBay. These are usually fine. I made my dead test cartridge using one of these cases, but it doesn't fit this particular cartridge because it's a big one and has sockets on it and stuff like that, so I can't really make it fit. I'm going to order another case for this. Just going to solder on a little button for now, so we have a reset button. So I'm just going to add this little yellow button there, switch. It's just going to be temporary until I find out which case this put in. There might put a little tactile switch there or something like that, but for now this is going to have to do, and it's going to work. Of course, it's like no rocket science. It's just a switch. There we go. This looks kind of weird, but it's going to do the trick. And it's, yeah, not very permanently attached, but it is attached there. So let's test it. Yep, reset works. So, so much for now. This seems to work beautifully. Let's test Max Basic. This shouldn't really work on the Commodore 64, but maybe it does. Okay, and it actually works. And somebody in the comments, I don't remember who it was, commented that they actually added a key click sound that is coming from the speakers to the Max Basic, because the membrane keyboard doesn't give much of a feedback. Yep. That's nice. Okay, they did that. And this is like the basic, and now we have the RAM working. This is like the 2 kilobytes of RAM that are on the cartridge itself. Of course, you can't do much with 2 kilobytes. But something like this. Yeah, okay. This is pretty interesting. I'm going to have some fun with this cartridge. That's for sure. Even though I can only test it on a Commodore 64 now. Let's test Mini Basic. That's another basic. Even less RAM, I think. 510 bytes free. This is the one that didn't have an additional RAM chip on the cartridge. Can't really type at the moment. This is nice. Yeah, it's basic. Basically basic. So this has like the color scheme. This is interesting because it has the dark gray font on a white background with the cyan border. Like it's similar to the VIC-20, but the VIC-20 has like I think like blue lettering. Something. This is gray. This looks nice actually. Nice color scheme. Although you only have 510 bytes to make your programs work, which is really not much at all. You can't really do anything serious with this. Okay, let's just pretend this is a Commodore Max. Let's see. We have the music machine stuff as well. I think that's the same as the Commodore 64 versions. Yeah, it pretty much looks like it. Omega Rays, we already saw that on the real Max. Should be the same, really. Yeah, I have my joystick connected. Let's see. Probably in the wrong port, but let's see anyway. Yep. There we are. So this all should run on an NTSC machine. That's probably why there are some graphics glitches down there in the scroller, because the timings are not quite correct. I assume that's why. Maybe the Commodore 64 I'm using is a bit damaged. I don't really know. Yeah, but this seems to work beautifully. This is nice. I'm going to send one of these cartridges to Manuel, who lent me his Max, and this Wizard of War, the Max version, which looks a lot different from the Commodore 64 version actually. That's interesting. Yeah, so you probably know most of the games that are on this cartridge. They're running at different speeds because these are the NTSC. These are made for NTSC, obviously, because the Max machine was only ever released as an NTSC machine in Japan. This is like absolutely no Space Invaders clone. So these are running actually because the Commodore 64 has the Multimax mode, which is a compatibility layer, or not even a layer, it's like a mode where the memory is arranged differently. So the Commodore 64 basically becomes the Commodore Max. In this mode the ROM is overwritten by the ROM on the cartridge, actually, which makes this really useful for... This is the mode the dead test cartridge uses, so it can overwrite the kernel. You don't have to have a working kernel to use a dead test cartridge. And there's a couple of cartridges that are using this mode, in particular some fast loader and freezer cartridges. Which is pretty interesting, because this basically, the Ultimax mode basically overrides the whole system and it's just using the cartridge, which makes it, of course, pretty useful for all kinds of interesting things. So, yeah, this works beautifully. Thanks so much for watching, thanks for your support, thanks for your comments. I'm going to try to answer more of them in the future. I'm sorry that I didn't answer much lately. I'm really busy doing these videos and with real life stuff. So anyway, thank you. Hope to see you again on this channel. If you like this, check out my Patreon. There's going to be a bit of behind the scenes stuff on there always. So yeah, if you're interested in this stuff, check out my other videos. Subscribe to this channel. Stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching. I'm Jan Peter. See you next time. Bye. This is actually one I played as a kid on my father's Commodore 64 and then later on my own Commodore 64. It's like a real classic. I quite like this actually because it's so simple and still it's a pretty nice game. It's fun to play. Although, as with all games, I suck at it, even though I played it before. And I'm not very fast at all, obviously. This gets hard pretty quickly. There's a lot of trees.